The gunshot echoed through the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, as Isaac Blackwood ducked behind a water trough, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The year was 1878, and he had just ridden into town with nothing but his Colt revolver, a bedroll, and barely enough money for a hot meal. Now bullets were flying, and he hadn't even had time to water his horse. "Damn it all," Isaac muttered, peering around the edge of the trough to see who was so intent on putting a hole in him. He hadn't recognized a soul in this town, which meant this was likely a case of mistaken identity or just plain bad luck. 3 men stood in front of the saloon, rifles aimed in his direction. "You picked the wrong town to ride into, stranger," one of them shouted. Isaac's chestnut mare, Penny, whinnied nervously from where he'd left her hitched to a post. He needed to get to her and get out of this town fast. With one swift movement, he drew his revolver and fired 2 shots in rapid succession, not aiming to kill but to scatter his attackers long enough to make a break for it. The men ducked for cover, giving Isaac the opening he needed. He sprinted for Penny, dodging between wagons and barrels. Just as he reached his horse, he heard a woman's desperate cry from the alley beside the general store. "Help! Please, somebody help!" Every instinct told Isaac to ignore the plea, to mount up and ride out of this God-forsaken town before those men regrouped. But something in that voice, raw fear mixed with determination, stopped him cold. Cursing his own foolishness, he led Penny quickly into the alley, following the sound. There, pressed against the wall with a bundle clutched tightly to her chest, stood a young woman. Her dress was torn and mudded, her honey blonde hair falling loose from what had once been an elegant updo. But it was her eyes that caught him, fierce and fearful all at once, the color of a summer storm. "Madam," Isaac said, tipping his hat instinctively despite the circumstances. "Seems like you're in some trouble." "They're going to kill me," she whispered, and the bundle in her arms squirmed. "A baby, no more than a few months old. Please, I need to get out of town." Before Isaac could respond, a bullet splintered the wooden siding inches from his head. The woman screamed, curling her body protectively around her child. "Get on," Isaac commanded, helping her mount Penny in one fluid motion before swinging up behind her. "Hold tight to that little one." As they burst from the alley, Isaac spotted the men regrouping in the street. He spurred Penny forward, galloping straight past their attackers, who scrambled to take aim. The woman pressed close against him, her baby wailing in protest at the sudden movement. Bullets kicked up dust around them as they thundered out of Redemption Creek, but soon the sounds of pursuit faded into the vast Wyoming wilderness. Only when they'd put several miles between themselves and the town did Isaac slow Penny to a walk, the horse's sides heaving with exertion. "I reckon you owe me an explanation, madam," Isaac said, his voice rough from the dust of their escape. "Starting with your name and why those men were so keen on ventilating us both." The woman shifted in the saddle before him, her back stiff with tension. "Olivia," she said after a moment. "Olivia Montgomery, and this is my son, James." The baby had quieted now, seemingly lulled by the gentle rocking motion of the horse. "Those men work for my late husband's brother, Vincent Montgomery. He wants my baby dead." Isaac felt his blood run cold. What kind of man wants to kill an infant? "The kind who stands to inherit a fortune if James isn't around to claim it," Olivia replied, her voice bitter. "My husband William was the eldest son. When he died 3 months ago, his share of the family mining business should have passed to James. But Vincent has never accepted that a baby should control what he believes is rightfully his." Isaac guided Penny toward a creek he could hear bubbling nearby. They needed water, and he needed time to think. This wasn't his fight. He was a drifter, a man with his own ghosts to outrun. The last thing he needed was to get tangled up with a wealthy widow and her inheritance troubles. "Mrs. Montgomery, I'm sorry for your troubles, but I can pay you," she interrupted, turning to face him with those storm cloud eyes. "I have money sewn into my petticoats. Enough to make it worth your while if you'll escort us to my sister's home in Denver." "Denver," Isaac whistled. "That's more than 300 miles from here. Please," Olivia said, and there was steel beneath the plea. "I have nowhere else to turn. Vincent has men throughout the territory. I won't last a day on my own with James." Isaac dismounted at the creek's edge, helping Olivia down carefully. She cradled her son close, the baby's tiny fist curled around a lock of her hair. Isaac filled his canteen and offered it to her first, watching as she drank gratefully. "I'm no hired gun, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be a guide to help us reach safety." She adjusted her hold on James, revealing a wedding ring that caught the afternoon sun. "Once we reach Denver, I'll have all the protection I need." "My brother-in-law's reach doesn't extend that far." Isaac took back the canteen, weighing his options. He'd been headed nowhere in particular when he rode into Redemption Creek, just another town in a long string of places where he didn't belong. Denver was as good a destination as any. $200, he said finally. "Half now, half when we reach Denver." Relief flooded Olivia's face. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, Isaac Blackwood. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood." As night fell, they made camp in a sheltered hollow, far from any trails. Isaac built a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden. Olivia fed James, humming softly to him as he nursed beneath a blanket Isaac had given her for privacy. "How old is he?" Isaac asked, more to break the silence than out of genuine curiosity. 4 months next week, Olivia replied, looking down at her son with such tenderness that Isaac had to glance away. "He has his father's eyes. And what was your husband like?" Isaac didn't know why he was asking. Perhaps it was the quiet of the night, or the strangeness of sharing a campfire with a woman and child after so many solitary years. Olivia's expression dimmed. William was complicated. The eldest son of a powerful family raised to believe the world owed him something. She stroked James's downy head, but he was trying to be better for James. He wanted his son to grow up different than he had. What happened to him? Mining accident. At least that's what Vincent claimed. Her voice hardened. 3 weeks later, I found evidence suggesting it was no accident at all. That's when I knew we weren't safe. Isaac stared into the flames. "So you ran?" "I had to, for James." She looked up at him, her face half in shadow. "And what about you, Mr. Blackwood? What brings a man like you to a place like Redemption Creek?" "Just passing through," he said, the well-worn lie coming easily. "I'm not one for putting down roots." "Everyone has a story," Olivia persisted. "You didn't become this man alone, wary, quick with a gun without reason." Isaac poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "War makes men into things they never thought they'd be, Mrs. Montgomery. I rode with the 5th Texas Cavalry. By the time it was over, there wasn't much of home left to go back to." "I'm sorry," she said, and the simple sincerity in those 2 words made something in his chest ache. "It was a long time ago." He stood abruptly. "You should get some sleep. We'll head out at first light." The next morning brought clear skies and a renewed sense of urgency. Isaac had spent the night half awake, listening for pursuit. They ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack, Olivia somehow managing to look dignified despite the circumstances. "We'll need supplies," Isaac said as they mounted up. "There's a trading post about 20 miles west of here. Should be safe enough." "How can you be sure?" Olivia asked, settling James into a makeshift sling she'd fashioned across her chest. "It's run by a Shoshone man and his French wife, not the type to ask questions or remember faces." Isaac clicked his tongue, urging Penny forward. "Besides, we don't have much choice. We won't make it to Denver on what we have." They rode in companionable silence for most of the morning, the Wyoming landscape stretching vast and beautiful around them. Isaac found himself watching Olivia when he thought she wouldn't notice the gentle way she spoke to her son, the determination in her posture despite her obvious exhaustion. By midday, they'd reached the trading post, a sturdy log building nestled at the base of a rocky outcropping. A few horses were hitched outside, but nothing that raised Isaac's suspicions. "Wait here," he told Olivia, helping her dismount in the shade of a large pine. "I'll see if it's safe." Inside, the trading post was cool and dim, smelling of leather, tobacco, and dried herbs. The proprietor, Joseph Eagle Wing, nodded in recognition when Isaac entered. "Blackwood," he said, his English accented but clear. "Been many moons, Joseph." Isaac glanced around, noting the other customers, an elderly trapper and what looked to be a family of settlers. No threat there. "Need supplies for a journey. 2 adults, 1 infant." Joseph's eyebrows rose slightly, but he asked no questions as he helped Isaac gather what they needed: flour, coffee, dried meat, ammunition for Isaac's revolver, and a small pot for cooking. "News travels," Joseph said quietly as he wrapped their purchases. "Men asking about a woman with a baby, offering money for information." Isaac tensed. "When?" "Yesterday, heading east from here." Joseph met his gaze steadily. "My wife told them she saw such a woman on the stage to Cheyenne." Relief washed through Isaac. "I owe you." Joseph shook his head. "No debt between friends, but be careful, these men, they have hatred in their eyes." Outside, Isaac found Olivia pacing anxiously, James fussing in her arms. "What took so long?" she demanded. "I was beginning to think we're safe," Isaac assured her, loading their supplies into his saddlebags. "But we need to change course. Head south for a while before turning east toward Denver." Olivia's face paled. "They've found us?" "Not yet, but they're looking." Isaac helped her mount again. "Don't worry, I know these lands better than they do." They rode hard that afternoon, keeping to ravines and wooded areas whenever possible. By evening, they'd reached a small valley with a clear spring, a good place to camp for the night. As Isaac prepared a simple meal of beans and biscuits, he watched Olivia bathe James in a shallow basin fashioned from his hat. The baby gurgled and kicked, clearly delighting in the cool water, while Olivia smiled down at him with such love that it made Isaac's chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "He's a good baby," Isaac observed, bringing Olivia a plate of food once James was dried and swaddled again. "He is," she agreed, accepting the plate gratefully. "Though I fear this journey is hard on him. Babies need routine, stability." "He'll have that again soon," Isaac promised, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Olivia looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You're a kind man, Mr. Blackwood, despite your efforts to appear otherwise." Isaac shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Don't mistake necessity for kindness, Mrs. Montgomery. I'm being paid, remember? Is that really all this is to you? A transaction?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with something Isaac wasn't ready to acknowledge. He was saved from answering by James, who began to fuss, demanding his mother's attention. That night, as Olivia and James slept, Isaac sat watch, his thoughts in turmoil. He'd spent the years since the war drifting, taking odd jobs, some lawful, others less so, and never staying anywhere long enough to form attachments. It was easier that way, safer. Yet here he was, risking his life for a woman and child he'd known for barely 2 days. The next morning brought clouds gathering on the horizon, promising rain. They packed up quickly, eager to cover as much ground as possible before the storm hit. "I've been thinking," Isaac said as they rode. "Once we cross into Colorado territory, we should be able to catch a train part of the way to Denver. It'll be faster and safer than continuing on horseback." Olivia nodded, adjusting James's sling. "That sounds wise. I have enough money for tickets. There's a settlement called Pine Creek about 3 days' ride from here. Small, but it has a telegraph office. I can send word to your sister to expect us." "Thank you," Olivia said softly, "for thinking of these things. I'm afraid I'm not at my best right now." "You're doing fine," Isaac assured her, and meant it. Many women of her station would have collapsed under the strain, but Olivia carried herself with a quiet dignity that impressed him more each day. The rain began around noon, a gentle drizzle that soon turned into a steady downpour. Isaac led them to a small cave he remembered from his travels, where they could wait out the worst of the storm. Inside, they built a small fire near the entrance, careful to keep the smoke to a minimum. Olivia stripped off James's wet clothes, wrapping him in the driest blanket they had. The baby sneezed, a tiny sound that made both adults freeze. "He's getting cold," Olivia said, worry creasing her brow. "I should have thought to buy more blankets at the trading post." "Here," Isaac said, shrugging out of his coat. It was worn but still offered warmth. "Wrap him in this." Olivia looked up at him, startled by the gesture. "But you'll be cold." "I've weathered worse," he said with a half smile. "Besides, I've got the fire to tend." She accepted the coat, carefully bundling James inside it. The baby settled almost immediately, his eyelids drooping as he nestled against his mother's warmth. "Tell me about your sister," Isaac said, trying to distract Olivia from her worry. "The one in Denver," Olivia's expression softened. Charlotte is 5 years older than me. She married a banker and moved to Denver before the war. They have 3 children now. She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. She's always been the practical one while I was the dreamer. She warned me about marrying into the Montgomery family, said they valued money above all else. Sounds like she was right. She was, Olivia agreed, her smile fading. But I was young and in love, or thought I was. William courted me with poetry and promises. By the time I realized what his family was truly like, I was already carrying James. Isaac nodded, understanding dawning. And that's when things changed. Yes, William became protective, not just of me, but of his inheritance, what would become James's inheritance. He started keeping records, questioning his brother's business decisions. She stroked her son's cheek. I believe that's what got him killed. The rain continued through the afternoon and into the evening, drumming steadily on the land outside their shelter. They ate a quiet dinner, and Olivia sang softly to James, lullabies that made Isaac think of his mother, long gone now. "You have a beautiful voice," he said when she finished. Olivia blushed, the color warming her pale cheeks. "My father insisted on singing lessons, said it was a proper accomplishment for a young lady," she smiled ruefully. "Not particularly useful for surviving in the wilderness, I'm afraid." "I don't know," Isaac replied. "A bit of beauty in a harsh world seems plenty useful to me." Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted in the air between them, a recognition that went beyond words. Then James stirred, breaking the moment, and Olivia turned her attention back to her son. The storm passed during the night, and they set out at dawn under clearing skies. The landscape had been transformed by the rain, wildflowers suddenly visible among the grasses, the scent of sage sharp and clean in the air. "It's beautiful," Olivia breathed, taking in the vista before them. "I've lived in Wyoming Territory for 3 years, but I've never seen it like this." "Most folks don't," Isaac said, understanding her wonder. "They stick to towns and roads, never venturing out to see what the land has to offer." "Is that why you wander, to see the beauty in wild places?" Isaac considered her question. "Partly," he admitted, "but mostly I wander because I haven't found a reason to stay anywhere." Olivia nodded, as if his answer confirmed something she'd already suspected. They rode on in comfortable silence, making good progress across the rain-softened ground. Around midday, Isaac's instincts prickled. He reined in Penny, scanning their surroundings. "What is it?" Olivia whispered, immediately alert to his tension. "Not sure," he murmured, hand moving to his revolver. "Something doesn't feel right." Then he saw a flash of metal in the distance, sunlight reflecting off a rifle barrel. Without hesitation, Isaac wheeled Penny around, spurring her toward a cluster of rocks that would provide cover. "Riders coming," he told Olivia, his voice urgent but controlled. "At least 3, maybe more." They reached the rocks just as the first shot rang out, the bullet striking stone inches from where they'd been. Isaac helped Olivia and James down, positioning them behind the largest boulder. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver. "If anything happens to me, head northeast. There's a homestead about 5 miles that way, good people." "Isaac," Olivia said, clutching his arm. It was the first time she'd used his given name. "Be careful." He nodded once, then moved to the edge of their cover, peering out to assess the threat. 4 riders, moving fast across the open ground toward them. One he recognized from Redemption Creek, a hulking man with a distinctive red beard. Isaac took aim and fired, not expecting to hit at this distance, but hoping to slow their approach. The riders scattered, taking cover behind a low rise in the terrain. "Mrs. Montgomery," Isaac called, keeping his eyes on the horizon. "Those men, is one of them Vincent?" Olivia crept forward, careful to stay shielded, and looked where he indicated. "No," she said after a moment. "But the one with the red beard is Garrett, Vincent's foreman. He's the one who came to the house the day William died, demanding to know where his papers were kept." Isaac nodded grimly. "They'll be cautious now, knowing we're armed. That buys us some time." "Time for what? We're trapped here." "Not necessarily." Isaac scanned their surroundings, mind racing. "There's a ravine about 100 yards to our right. If we can reach it, we can follow it to the river. They won't be able to track us easily once we're in the water." 100 yards in the open," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Can we make it? I'll provide covering fire, Isaac told her. You take James and run for it. Don't stop, don't look back, I'll be right behind you. Olivia clutched James tighter, her resolve visibly hardening. I'm ready. Isaac moved to the opposite side of their rocky shelter, making himself visible enough to draw the men's attention. As soon as they fired at him, he called out, Now, Olivia, run. She burst from cover, James held securely against her chest as she sprinted toward the ravine. Isaac fired rapidly, forcing the pursuers to keep their heads down. He saw Olivia reach the edge of the ravine and disappear from view, relief flooding through him. Then a bullet grazed his arm, tearing through his shirt sleeve and leaving a burning trail across his skin. Isaac ducked back behind the rocks, checking the wound quickly. Painful but not serious, he'd been lucky. Taking a deep breath, he prepared for his own dash to safety. The distance seemed to stretch endlessly before him, but there was no choice now. Counting to 3, he launched himself forward, running in a zigzag pattern as bullets kicked up dust around him. He was halfway to the ravine when Penny suddenly bolted from behind the rocks, spooked by the gunfire. The men immediately turned their attention to the horse, giving Isaac the opening he needed to reach the ravine and slide down its steep bank. Olivia was waiting, her face pale but composed. You're hurt, she said, reaching for his arm. It's nothing, Isaac assured her, wincing as she tore a strip from her petticoat to bind the wound. But we need to move, they'll be coming after us. They hurried along the bottom of the ravine, which deepened as they went, eventually opening into a narrow canyon with a swift flowing river at its base. The sound of the water would mask their movements, but it also meant they couldn't hear if their pursuers were gaining on them. We'll have to cross, Isaac said, eyeing the river. It wasn't particularly wide, but the current was strong. Can you swim? Olivia nodded, though her expression was uncertain. Yes, but with James. I'll take him, Isaac decided. I'm stronger and I can keep him above water more easily. He held out his arms. Do you trust me? Olivia hesitated only a moment before carefully transferring her son to Isaac's grasp. With both our lives, it seems. Isaac cradled James against his chest, using his good arm to support the baby's head. Stay close to me. Let the current carry you some, but keep angling toward the far bank. They waded in together, the cold water shocking after the warmth of the day. James whimpered but didn't cry out, almost as if he sensed the need for quiet. When the water reached his chest, Isaac lifted the baby higher, swimming one arm toward the opposite shore. The current was stronger than he'd expected, pulling them downstream as they crossed. Isaac kept his eyes fixed on Olivia, ready to help her if she faltered, but she swam steadily beside him, her determination evident in every stroke. They reached the far bank about 50 yards downstream from where they'd entered, climbing out on a narrow strip of pebbly beach. Both adults were soaked and shivering, but James, protected by Isaac's careful hold, was relatively dry. You did well, Isaac told Olivia, returning her son to her arms. Both of you. She smiled shakily, pressing her cheek against James's head. Thank you for protecting him. We're not safe yet, Isaac cautioned, scanning the opposite bank for signs of pursuit. We need to keep moving, find shelter before nightfall. They followed the river for another mile before cutting inland toward a line of hills visible in the distance. The going was slow, their wet clothes heavy and uncomfortable, but the terrain worked in their favor, offering plenty of cover. As the sun began to set, they reached a small stand of cottonwoods surrounding a spring. It was as good a place as any to make camp, with water, firewood, and enough visibility to spot anyone approaching. We'll rest here, Isaac decided, but no fire tonight, can't risk the smoke being seen. Olivia nodded, too exhausted to argue. She settled against a tree trunk, James drowsing in her arms. Do you think we lost them? For now, Isaac said, unwilling to offer false reassurance. But they're determined, we'll need to be extra careful from here on. They shared a cold meal of jerky and dried fruit, neither having much appetite after the day's events. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, and Isaac noticed Olivia shivering in her still damp dress. Here, he said, unrolling his bedroll and draping the blanket around her shoulders. You and James take this, I'll keep watch. You need rest too, she protested. I'll be fine. I'm used to going without sleep. It wasn't a boast, but a simple statement of fact, born from years of living on the edge of danger. Olivia studied him in the gathering darkness. You've lived a hard life, haven't you, Isaac? The question caught him off guard. No harder than most who fought in the war, but you've been fighting ever since in your own way. She shifted James to a more comfortable position. Running from something, or maybe towards something you can't quite name. Isaac looked away, uncomfortable with how accurately she'd read him. Get some sleep, Mrs. Montgomery. Tomorrow will be another long day. Olivia, she corrected gently. After all we've been through, I think you can call me Olivia. Olivia, he repeated, the name feeling right on his tongue. Good night. She settled into the bedroll with James, and soon her breathing deepened into sleep. Isaac sat with his back against a tree, revolver across his knees, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. His arm throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, but the bleeding had stopped, and he'd suffered worse. As the night wore on, his thoughts kept returning to the woman and child sleeping nearby. In just a few days, they'd come to matter to him in ways he hadn't allowed anyone to matter in years. It was dangerous, this feeling. Attachments made a man vulnerable. Yet he couldn't deny the protective instinct that surged through him whenever he looked at them, or the unfamiliar warmth that spread through his chest when Olivia smiled. Dawn found Isaac still awake, his body tired but his senses alert. He watched as Olivia stirred, her eyes finding him immediately upon waking. You didn't sleep, she said, accusation mingling with concern in her voice. I dozed some, he lied, getting to his feet and stretching his stiff muscles. How's the little one? As if on cue, James began to fuss, hungry after the long night. Olivia sat up, adjusting her clothing to feed him. Isaac turned away, giving her privacy, and busied himself checking their surroundings in the clear morning light. No sign of pursuit, but that didn't mean they were safe. He calculated they still had at least 2 days of hard travel before reaching Pine Creek, where they could catch the train to Denver. 2 days during which anything could happen. Once James was fed and they'd eaten a quick breakfast, they set out again, keeping to the cover of the hills whenever possible. The day grew hot, the Wyoming summer asserting itself after the brief respite of the rain. They stopped frequently for water and rest, mindful of both Penny's limits and the baby's needs. By mid-afternoon, they'd reached a high ridge that offered a sweeping view of the plains beyond. Isaac pulled up, frowning as he spotted dust in the distance riders, moving fast along their back trail. They're persistent, I'll give them that, he muttered. Olivia followed his gaze, her expression hardening. Vincent won't give up easily, there's too much money at stake. Money, Isaac said with disgust. Men have been killing each other over it since the beginning of time, but it never seems worth the blood spilled. No, Olivia agreed softly. It doesn't. They pushed on, descending from the ridge into a landscape of rolling hills and scattered pine groves. As the sun began to set, Isaac spotted what he'd been hoping for, a lined shack, used by cowboys during the grazing season. It stood empty now, a single-room structure built of rough logs with a small corral beside it. We'll stop here for the night, he decided. It's more shelter than we've had, and there's a pump for water. Inside, the shack was basic but clean, containing a narrow bunk, a crude table with 2 stools and a small iron stove. Isaac checked the stovepipe to ensure it was clear, then built a small fire. For the first time in days, they'd have warmth and a hot meal. Olivia sank onto one of the stools, cradling a sleeping James. This feels like a palace after sleeping on the ground, Isaac smiled, setting water to boil for coffee. Amazing how our standards change when necessity demands it. Indeed. She watched him move about the small space, preparing their simple meal with practiced efficiency. You know, you never told me where you were headed when you rode into Redemption Creek. Isaac paused, considering his answer. Truthfully, nowhere in particular. Just following the season, looking for work when I needed it. That sounds lonely, Olivia observed, her voice free of judgment. It can be, he admitted, surprising himself with his candor. But it's simpler that way. No expectations, no disappointments. No connections, Olivia added softly. No one to lose. Their eyes met across the small room, understanding passing between them. Isaac looked away first, suddenly aware of how close the walls seemed, how intimate the space. "You should take the bunk," he said, changing the subject. "I'll make a pallet on the floor." After they'd eaten, Olivia settled James on the bunk and then stepped outside, telling Isaac she needed a moment of fresh air. He gave her space, staying by the stove and trying not to think about how natural it felt, this domestic arrangement with a woman who was still essentially a stranger. When she returned, her eyes were red-rimmed but dry. "I was thinking about William," she said, answering his unspoken question, "about how everything might have been different if he'd lived." "Do you miss him?" Isaac asked before he could stop himself. Olivia sat on the edge of the bunk, her hand resting protectively near James. "I miss the man I thought he was when we married. I miss the father James will never know." She met Isaac's gaze steadily, but our marriage had become difficult even before he died. William was a complicated man, raised with certain expectations about what a wife should be. "And you didn't meet those expectations." A small, sad smile curved her lips. "I was too independent, too questioning. I wanted a partnership, not just to be the mother of his heir." She stroked James's cheek. "When I became pregnant, things improved for a while. William was overjoyed to have a son on the way. But after James was born, the old tensions returned." Isaac nodded, understanding more than he cared to admit. He'd seen similar marriages where a woman's spirit was slowly crushed beneath the weight of a man's expectations. "For what it's worth," he said carefully, "I think you're doing right by your son, giving him a chance at a life free from his uncle's influence." "Thank you," Olivia whispered. "That means more than you know." They fell silent, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and James's soft breathing. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the eaves of the small shack. It would be a cold night despite the fire. "We should get some rest," Isaac said eventually. "I'll take first watch, wake you in a few hours." "You need sleep too," Olivia insisted. "You can't keep going indefinitely without rest." "I'll sleep when we reach Pine Creek," he promised, knowing it was foolish to push himself but unwilling to risk their safety. Olivia studied him for a long moment, then reached out, her fingers brushing his where they rested on the table. "I've never met a man like you, Isaac Blackwood, so determined to deny himself even the most basic comforts." Her touch sent warmth spreading up his arm, a sensation both foreign and achingly familiar. "It's not denial," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "It's survival. Perhaps," she murmured, "or perhaps it's punishment for some sin you believe you've committed." Before he could respond, she withdrew her hand and lay down beside James, pulling the rough blanket over both of them. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep, leaving Isaac alone with thoughts more turbulent than he cared to admit. The night passed slowly, each sound outside the shack bringing Isaac to alert attention. But no danger materialized, and when dawn broke, he allowed himself a brief hour of sleep while Olivia kept watch. They set out early, Olivia and James riding Penny while Isaac walked beside them, leading the horse. His body protested the lack of rest, but he pushed the discomfort aside, focusing on the path ahead. By midday, they'd reached more open country, making better time but also exposing themselves more. Isaac kept a constant watch on their back trail, alert for any sign of pursuit. So far, there was none, but he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still tracking them. "Tell me about Denver," he said as they stopped for a brief rest. "What's it like now? I haven't been there in years." Olivia brightened at the question. "It's growing rapidly. Charlotte writes that new buildings are going up every month. They have gas lighting on the main streets now and a proper theater." She smiled, bouncing James gently on her knee. "Her husband says it's becoming quite civilized." "Civilized," Isaac repeated, the word sitting strangely on his tongue. "Been a while since I've been anywhere that could claim that distinction." "Do you miss it? Civilization?" Isaac considered the question. "Sometimes. A hot bath, a decent meal that I didn't have to cook myself. But mostly I prefer the open country, fewer complications." "Fewer people, you mean," Olivia said perceptively. "That too," he admitted with a slight smile. They continued on, the landscape gradually changing as they moved south, the hills giving way to more arid terrain. By late afternoon, Isaac estimated they were within a day's ride of Pine Creek. If they pushed hard, they could reach it by tomorrow evening. As dusk approached, they made camp in a shallow arroyo, using the banks for shelter. Without the luxury of the line shack, they were back to sleeping under the stars, but the night was mild, and Olivia didn't complain. After a simple dinner, they sat side by side, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. James was already asleep, swaddled in the blanket from Isaac's bedroll. "I've been thinking," Olivia said suddenly, "about what happens when we reach Denver." Isaac tensed, knowing this conversation was inevitable but dreading it nonetheless. "Your sister will take you in, you'll be safe there." "Yes," she agreed, "but what about you?" he shrugged, keeping his eyes on the horizon. "I'll collect the rest of my payment and move on. Maybe head to California. I've never seen the Pacific." Just like that. There was a note in her voice he couldn't quite identify, disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. "It's what we agreed," he reminded her, more harshly than he intended. Olivia was silent for a long moment. "Of course," she said finally. "I just thought, after everything we've been through together." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Isaac knew what she was asking, what she was offering. The possibility of something more than a brief encounter on the trail, something that terrified him more than any gunfight. "Olivia," he began, not knowing what he meant to say. A sound cut through the night, the distant crack of a rifle. Instinctively, Isaac pushed Olivia down, covering her body with his own as a bullet struck the ground where she'd been sitting moments before. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver. "Grab James and keep to the bottom of the arroyo." More shots rang out, bullets kicking up dust along the edge of their shelter. Isaac peered cautiously over the bank, trying to locate their attackers in the gathering darkness. He spotted movement about 100 yards away, 3 figures, using a stand of scrub pine for cover. "It's them," Olivia whispered, clutching James to her chest. The baby had awakened at the noise and was beginning to cry. "Oh God, Isaac, what do we do?" "We need to move along the arroyo," he decided quickly. "It deepens about a quarter mile ahead, should give us better cover." He checked his ammunition, only 6 bullets left, not enough for a prolonged firefight. "I'll lay down covering fire. When I tell you, run as fast as you can in that direction." He pointed downstream. Olivia nodded, her face pale but resolute in the fading light. "Be careful." Isaac squeezed her shoulder once, then moved to the edge of the arroyo. Taking careful aim, he fired twice in rapid succession, forcing their attackers to duck for cover. "Now, Olivia, run." She sprinted along the bottom of the dry streambed, James held tight against her. Isaac fired again, then followed, keeping his body between her and the gunmen. Bullets whined overhead as they ran, but the deepening shadows made accurate shooting difficult. They reached the deeper section of the arroyo, where the banks rose nearly 6 feet on either side, providing better protection. Isaac pulled Olivia into a small alcove carved by water during some long-ago flood. "Are you hit?" he demanded, checking her for injuries. "No, we're all right," she assured him, though her breathing was ragged from fear and exertion. James was still crying, small, hiccuping sobs that tore at Isaac's heart. "They'll be coming after us," he said grimly. "We need to keep moving." "Penny," Olivia suddenly remembered. "We left her tethered back there." "Can't worry about that now," Isaac said, though he felt a pang at the thought of his faithful mare. "Our lives are what matter." They continued along the arroyo, moving as quietly as possible in the near darkness. The crying had subsided to whimpers as James exhausted himself, finally falling into an uneasy sleep against his mother's shoulder. After what seemed like hours, the arroyo widened and shallowed, eventually opening onto a broad plain. With the cover gone, they were dangerously exposed, but there was no choice but to continue. "There's a homestead about 5 miles east of here," Isaac said, oriented by the stars overhead. "If we can reach it by morning, the family there might help us." Olivia nodded, too tired for words. They set out across the plain, walking close together in the darkness. Isaac kept his revolver ready, ears straining for any sound of pursuit, but the night remained quiet except for the usual wilderness noises, the cry of a coyote, the rustle of small creatures in the brush. By the time the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, they were both stumbling with exhaustion. James had awakened and was fussing hungrily. But Olivia had no choice but to keep moving, murmuring soothing words that seemed to have little effect. "There," Isaac said suddenly, pointing to a thin column of smoke rising against the pale sky. "That must be the homestead." New energy infused them at the sight, and they quickened their pace. As they drew closer, the outline of a small cabin and barn became visible, a fenced garden patch beside it showing signs of careful tending. "Wait here," Isaac told Olivia when they were within 100 yards of the place. "Let me make sure it's safe." He approached the cabin cautiously, aware that frontier hospitality didn't always extend to strangers appearing at dawn. When he was about 20 paces away, the door opened, and a man stepped out, rifle in hand. "That's far enough, stranger," the man called. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with a white beard and weathered face. "State your business." Isaac raised his hands to show he meant no harm. "My name is Isaac Blackwood. I'm traveling with a woman and her infant son. We were attacked last night and need shelter." The man studied him for a long moment, then glanced past him to where Olivia stood with James. His expression softened slightly. "Attacked by who?" "Men working for her brother-in-law," Isaac explained. "He wants her son dead for the inheritance." The man lowered his rifle, his face grim. "Got no patience for men who'd harm a child." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. "Name's Harlan McAllister. My wife Mary's inside. You and yours are welcome to shelter here." Relief flooded through Isaac. "Thank you, Mr. McAllister. We won't forget this kindness." He waved to Olivia, who hurried forward, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the promise of safety. Inside the cabin, they found a clean, modest home with a fire burning in the hearth. Mary McAllister, a small woman with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair, immediately took charge, settling Olivia in a rocking chair and bringing her a cup of hot tea. "Poor dear, you look done in," she clucked, eyeing James with concern. "And this little one needs feeding and changing, I'd wager." "Yes, madam," Olivia admitted, gratefully accepting the tea. "It's been a difficult night." While Mary helped Olivia tend to James, Harlan led Isaac to a rough-hewn table, pouring him a mug of strong coffee. "Now, son, tell me what kind of trouble you're in, and don't spare the details." Isaac explained their situation, including their plan to reach Pine Creek and take the train to Denver. Harlan listened without interruption, nodding occasionally. "Pine Creek's still a day's ride from here," he said when Isaac finished. "And without horses, you won't make it before those men catch up to you." "I know," Isaac acknowledged grimly, "but we don't have much choice." Harlan stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I might have a solution. Got a wagon I use for hauling supplies. It ain't fast, but it's better than walking, and I can spare one of my horses to pull it." Isaac stared at him, humbled by the offer. "Mr. McAllister, that's too generous. We can't accept. You can and you will," Harlan interrupted firmly. "I fought in the Mexican War, saw things no man should see, made me promise myself I'd never turn away from someone in genuine need." He met Isaac's gaze steadily. "Besides, Mary's taken a shine to that baby already. She'd never forgive me if I let anything happen to him." After a hearty breakfast, Isaac helped Harlan prepare the wagon while the women gathered supplies for the journey. Mary insisted on packing food, blankets, and even a few of her homemade remedies, just in case. "The train station in Pine Creek is on the north side of town," Harlan told Isaac as they worked. "If you reach it by tomorrow afternoon, you can catch the eastbound train to Denver. It stops there around 4 o'clock. "We'll need to leave soon," Isaac said, glancing at the sun climbing higher in the sky. "Those men won't have given up." "One more thing," Harlan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a worn but well-maintained Colt revolver, offering it to Isaac along with a box of ammunition. "Take this." Yours looked near empty when you arrived. Isaac accepted the weapon with deep gratitude. "I'll return it someday," he promised. Harlan waved away the promise. "Just get that woman and her child to safety. That'll be payment enough." By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. The wagon wasn't comfortable, but Mary had padded the seat with blankets, and there was room in the back for Olivia to sit with James if she needed to nurse him. "God bless you both," Olivia said, embracing Mary with genuine affection. "I don't know how we can ever repay your kindness." "Live a good life," Mary replied simply. Raise that boy to be a man of honor. That's all the payment we need." With final thanks and farewells, Isaac took the reins and they set off toward Pine Creek. The horse was sturdy but not swift, maintaining a steady pace that would get them to town by the following afternoon if all went well. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Isaac found himself glancing frequently at Olivia, noting the determination in her profile as she stared ahead at the road, one hand resting protectively on James's back as he slept against her chest. "What will you do in Denver?" he asked eventually, more to break the silence than from real curiosity. Olivia considered the question. "Charlotte's husband has connections in the banking industry. He believes he can help me secure James's inheritance legally without having to deal with Vincent directly." She sighed, looking down at her son. "Beyond that, I don't know. Perhaps I'll teach music again as I did before I married." "You were a teacher," she nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Piano and voice at a girls' school in St. Louis. I enjoyed it very much, actually." There's something deeply satisfying about nurturing talent in the young. Isaac tried to picture her at a piano, surrounded by eager students, and found the image came easily. "You'd be good at that," he said with certainty. "Thank you," she replied, looking pleased at the compliment. "And what about you, Isaac? What would you do if you weren't constantly moving from place to place?" The question caught him off guard. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to think beyond the next town, the next job. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "Maybe buy some land, raise horses." "I've always had a way with them." "I can see that," Olivia said softly. "You'd be good with horses, patient, gentle when needed, firm when necessary." Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten, as if she were speaking of more than just his way with animals. He kept his eyes on the road, unwilling to examine the feeling too closely. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horse and eat some of the food Mary had packed. James was awake and alert, cooing happily as Olivia bounced him on her knee. The day was warm but not oppressively so, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rainfall. "We should reach Pine Creek by tomorrow afternoon if we keep this pace," Isaac said, checking the horse's harness before they continued. "Just in time to catch the train." Olivia nodded, but there was a shadow in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Isaac," she began hesitantly, "I've been thinking about what happens when we reach Denver." Here it was again, the conversation he'd been avoiding. "Olivia, no, please, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "I understand that you've built your life around not staying in one place, not forming attachments. I respect that choice." She took a deep breath. "But I want you to know that if you ever decided you wanted something different, there would be a place for you with us." The simple offer struck him like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily speechless. Part of him wanted to grab hold of it with both hands, to claim the family he'd never thought he could have. Another part, the part that had kept him alive all these years, recoiled in terror at the vulnerability such a choice would create. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "You don't have to say anything now," Olivia assured him, her voice steady despite the color in her cheeks. "Just think about it." They continued their journey, the silence between them now charged with unspoken possibilities. Isaac found his thoughts in turmoil, old fears battling against new desires. He'd spent so long believing he wasn't meant for a settled life, for the kind of happiness Olivia was offering. Could he really change now, become the kind of man who could be a husband, perhaps even a father to James? The afternoon wore on, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the western horizon. Isaac was so lost in thought that he almost missed the sound, a distant thunder of hoofbeats, growing steadily louder. "Riders coming," he said sharply, immediately alert. "Fast." Olivia clutched James tighter, her face paling. "Is it them?" Isaac stood in the wagon, straining to see. A cloud of dust was visible on the road behind them, still distant but closing rapidly. "Can't tell yet, but we can't take chances. Hold on." He snapped the reins, urging the horse to a faster pace. The wagon lurched forward, bouncing roughly over the rutted road. James began to cry at the sudden movement, and Olivia did her best to soothe him while bracing herself against the jolting ride. The pursuit gained on them steadily, and soon Isaac could make out 4 riders pushing their horses hard. One had a distinctive red beard. Garrett, Vincent's foreman. It's them, he confirmed grimly. We can't outrun them in this wagon. Olivia's face set in determined lines. Then we fight. Isaac glanced at her in surprise, then nodded. There's a bend in the road ahead with some large boulders. We'll make our stand there. He guided the wagon around the curve and behind the rocks, then jumped down, helping Olivia and James to shelter. Drawing both revolvers, his own and Harlan's, he positioned himself where he could cover the approach. Stay down, he told Olivia. If things go badly, there's a ravine behind us. Follow it down to the creek and keep going east. You'll reach Pine Creek eventually. Isaac, she began, her voice tight with fear. It'll be all right, he promised, though they both knew it might be a lie. Just keep James safe. The riders slowed as they approached the bend, clearly wary of an ambush. Isaac waited, breath steady, hands firm on his weapons. He'd been in worse situations and survived. He could do it again, had to do it again for Olivia and James. The first rider came into view, rifle at the ready. Isaac fired, the shot catching the man in the shoulder and knocking him from his horse. The others scattered, taking cover behind trees and rocks on the opposite side of the road. Blackwood, Garrett's voice boomed out. We know you're there. Hand over the woman and the child and you can ride away free and clear. Not going to happen, Garrett, Isaac called back. Tell Vincent he's lost this one. A barrage of shots answered him, bullets striking the rocks around them. Isaac returned fire sparingly, conscious of his limited ammunition. This standoff couldn't last long. Sooner or later, one side would have to make a move. Isaac, Olivia whispered urgently. Listen. He paused, straining his ears. Then he heard at the distant but distinct sound of hoofbeats, many of them approaching from the direction of Pine Creek. Riders coming, he murmured. But friend or foe, they didn't have to wonder long. Around the bend in the road ahead came a group of mounted men, at least 10 strong, led by a figure in a marshal's coat. Garrett and his men, caught between two forces, hesitated visibly. This is U.S. Marshal Daniel Fletcher, a commanding voice called out. Throw down your weapons and surrender. For a moment, it seemed Garrett might resist. Then, with a curse audible even at a distance, he tossed his rifle to the ground. His remaining men followed suit, clearly recognizing the futility of their position. Isaac kept his weapons trained on them until the marshal and his deputies had the situation well in hand. Only then did he lower his revolvers, turning to Olivia with relief evident in every line of his body. It's over, he said simply. Tears filled her eyes as she clutched James to her chest. Who sent the marshal? That would be me, said a new voice. They turned to see Harlan McAllister riding toward them alongside the marshal, a satisfied expression on his weathered face. Figured you folks could use some help, he explained as he dismounted. Rode to Pine Creek after you left, told Marshal Fletcher here about your situation. He nodded toward the lawman, who tipped his hat in acknowledgement. Mr. McAllister gave us quite a tale, Marshal Fletcher said, approaching them. Something about a baby's inheritance and murderous relatives. Sounded far-fetched until we spotted these men tracking you like wolves after a wounded deer. It's all true, Marshal, Olivia said, stepping forward with James in her arms. My name is Olivia Montgomery. My brother-in-law Vincent wants my son dead so he can claim the family business for himself. The marshal's expression hardened. Madam, we'll need your full statement, and I'll be sending telegrams to the authorities in Wyoming Territory regarding this Vincent Montgomery. He glanced at the captured men, who were being disarmed and bound by his deputies. Meanwhile, these gentlemen will be enjoying the hospitality of the Pine Creek jail. Relief washed over Isaac in a dizzying wave. It was over. Olivia and James were safe, truly safe. The realization left him feeling strangely hollow, as if some essential purpose had been fulfilled, leaving him without direction. The train to Denver leaves in 2 hours, Marshal Fletcher informed them. My deputies will escort you to the station and see you safely aboard. Thank you, Marshal, Olivia said with genuine gratitude. She turned to Harlan, impulsively embracing the older man. And thank you, Mr. McAllister, you saved our lives. Just doing what's right, Harlan replied gruffly, though he looked pleased at her thanks. He turned to Isaac, extending his hand. You take care, Blackwood, you're a good man in a tight spot. Isaac shook his hand firmly. Your wagon and horse, keep 'em, Harlan interrupted. Sell 'em in Denver if you need the money. Consider it payment for the entertainment you provided an old man looking for some excitement. They reached Pine Creek with an hour to spare before the train's arrival. Marshal Fletcher insisted they come to his office first to provide formal statements about Vincent Montgomery and his men. He promised to wire ahead to the Denver authorities, ensuring that law enforcement there would be aware of the situation. Mrs. Montgomery, he said as they prepared to leave for the station, your brother-in-law will face serious charges once we gather all the evidence. I doubt he'll be troubling you or your son again. Thank you, Marshal, Olivia replied, the relief evident in her voice, for everything. At the station, Isaac found himself growing increasingly tense as the time of departure approached. The moment of parting he'd been both dreading and anticipating was almost upon them. They stood on the platform, the Denver-bound train steaming at the station, passengers already boarding. Isaac had purchased their tickets, 2 of them, though he still wasn't entirely sure he would use his. Our train is boarding, Olivia observed quietly, adjusting James in her arms. The baby was awake, his eyes wide as he took in the noise and bustle of the station. Yes, Isaac agreed, unable to find more words. Olivia studied his face, a small furrow appearing between her brows. You're not coming, are you? The direct question forced him to confront the decision he'd been avoiding. Olivia, I don't know if I can be what you need, what James needs. I've been alone for so long. I'm not asking you to be anything other than what you are, she said softly. A good man, a brave man, a man who risked his life for a woman and child he didn't even know. And if that's not enough, the fear that had ruled his life for so long surged up, almost choking him. It is enough, Olivia insisted, stepping closer to him. Isaac, before I met you, I thought my life was over. I was running, terrified, with no hope beyond the next day. You gave me back my future. She shifted James so that the baby faced Isaac, tiny hands reaching out curiously. You gave him back his future. Isaac looked down at the child, at the perfect small fingers and trusting eyes. Something shifted inside him, a wall crumbling that he'd built long ago. I don't know how to be a father, he admitted, the words barely audible over the train's hissing steam. No one does at first, Olivia replied, a smile lighting her face. We learned together. The final boarding call echoed across the platform. It was time to choose. Isaac took a deep breath, then reached for his ticket. I guess we'd better find our seats, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The smile that bloomed across Olivia's face was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm, brilliant and warm. She leaned up, pressing a soft kiss to his cheek. Thank you, she whispered. As they boarded the train, James reached out again, his small hand catching hold of Isaac's finger with surprising strength. The simple gesture sent a wave of protectiveness through Isaac, along with something else, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. Hope. They found their seats in a passenger car near the rear of the train. As they settled in, the whistle blew, and the train lurched into motion, beginning the journey that would take them to Denver and whatever future awaited them there. Olivia leaned slightly against Isaac's shoulder, James dozing in her arms. Tell me about Denver again, Isaac said, his voice soft. About what we'll do when we get there. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears of happiness. Well, Charlotte's house has a small guest cottage in the back garden. We could stay there while we find our feet. Her husband knows of a livery stable that's looking for someone with experience with horses. She hesitated, then added, and there's a piece of land for sale just outside the city. 20 acres with good water and pasture, room enough for a house and some horses. Sounds like you've been planning this for a while, Isaac observed, a smile tugging at his lips. Hoping, Olivia corrected. There's a difference. As the train picked up speed, carrying them eastward toward the setting sun, Isaac felt something settling inside him, a sense of rightness, of belonging, that he'd never expected to find. The cowboy who had ridden into Redemption Creek with nothing was riding out again with a woman and her baby beside him. And somehow, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. 3 months later, Isaac stood on the porch of their newly built cabin, watching the sun rise over the land that was now their home. The 20 acres outside Denver had been purchased with a combination of Olivia's hidden funds and the money from James's inheritance, which Charlotte's husband had successfully secured through legal channels. Vincent Montgomery was awaiting trial in Wyoming Territory, his schemes exposed and his power broken. The cabin was simple but solid, built by Isaac's own hands with help from neighbors. Behind it, a small stable housed Penny, miraculously recovered and returned to them by Harlan McAllister. Along with 2 other horses Isaac was training for sale. Already their reputation for quality horseflesh was growing in the area. The sound of a piano drifted through the open window, Olivia practicing for her first students, who would begin coming to the house next week. Her voice joined the music, soft and sweet, singing a lullaby to James, who was now crawling and exploring every corner of their home. Isaac smiled, the expression no longer feeling foreign on his face. The nightmares that had plagued him since the war had grown less frequent, often dispelled by Olivia's gentle presence when he woke in the darkness. "Isaac?" Olivia appeared in the doorway, James balanced on her hip. The baby gave a delighted squeal at the sight of him, reaching out with eager hands. "Breakfast is ready. Be right there," he promised, taking James from her arms and lifting him high, making the child laugh with joy. The simple sound never failed to warm his heart. Olivia smiled up at them both, then rose on tiptoe to press a kiss to Isaac's lips. "I love you," she said, the words still new enough to send a thrill through him. "I love you too," he replied, meaning it more deeply than he had ever thought possible. As they went inside together, Isaac reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought them to this moment. A chance encounter in a dusty Wyoming town, bullets flying, a desperate escape, all leading to this quiet morning, this peaceful home, this family that was now his own. The cowboy who had ridden into town with nothing now had everything that mattered, and he wouldn't trade it for all the freedom of the open range. For the first time in his life, Isaac Blackwood was exactly where he belonged.